Okay, I'm going to give you your icebreaker question today, but with a little bit of a twist. Um, the icebreaker question is simply this: what is your picture of perfection? What does a perfect life look like? Um, just talk about that with your group. What does a perfect life look like? And then what I'd like for you to do is when you're done talking about that, go ahead to your journey journal and read the scriptures that are on that page with that question that talk about a perfect life from God's perspective. What does God think a perfect life looks like? And then compare those. What did your picture look like? And then what does this picture look like that we see from the scriptures? So, icebreaker and some scriptures right off the bat. Dive right in. Well, as we talk about those scriptures, there's probably nothing surprising as we talk about loving God with our whole heart, mind, soul, and strength, and loving our neighbor as ourselves. We've already talked about those things as really containing all of the law and the prophets. But what I want you to see here is the tie together between the teachings there, which are Jesus's teachings, and the life of Jesus, and a tie from that to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Uh, so, what we're going to do is we're going to make those connections and help put that picture together so you can see how all of this fits together. In the Garden of Eden, we saw that Adam and Eve were described as naked and unashamed. Or the way I'll say it on the rest of this video is nothing hidden and nothing to hide. With Jesus, what we see is that he lived a life that was perfect. He never sinned and he never lied to anyone, is what the scriptures say. Never sinned, well, that's nothing to hide. Uh, and he never lied to anyone. He had uh, nothing hidden. And so, um, as you put those things together, along with loving God and loving our neighbor as ourselves, that's how we're going to kind of unpack that picture a little bit today. Um, the first section that we're going to look at is that idea of nothing to hide, or Jesus never sinning, or that Adam and Eve were unashamed. This picture is before they ate the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden. And so what we're seeing here is they didn't feel shame until they ate the forbidden fruit. They had temptation in the garden, just like you and I have temptation, and like Jesus had temptation. The difference is that they went ahead and fell prey to the temptation that was given, those thoughts that were spoken into their minds by the serpent that was there in the garden. With Jesus, he never sinned. And so when he had the serpent talking to him, the devil, say in the wilderness for 40 days, for example, he did not fall prey to that temptation. And instead, he chose to do what God called him to do. So, with this idea of sinning or not sinning and temptation, what I want you to see is that in a garden walk, it doesn't mean it's free from temptation. It doesn't mean that the enemy doesn't come along and say, ooh, do this or do that, or say this or say that, or go here, or whatever the case may be. It's not that those thoughts don't come into your mind. What's happening is that we live in a world where those thoughts do come into our mind, but Adam and Eve followed those negative thoughts. Jesus did not. That's why we don't strive to be Adam and Eve like. We strive to be Christ like. What I want you to do is to read these passages here that talk about this idea of temptation and sin, and just talk about really, where do you cross the line? When does it stop being temptation and start becoming sin? Because what we want to do is be like Jesus. Jesus was tempted in every way like us, yet was without sin. So start talking about, where is that line? When do you cross the line, going from being tempted to actually sinning? And And how do you think Jesus was tempted but did not sin? And how do you think we can? Talk about that with your group. There's a lot there. When you're ready to dive into the next section, you can press play to continue. Well, I hope you had a good conversation about that. We're going to go on to the other part of the picture, Adam and Eve, Jesus, and us. What we see is that Adam and Eve were described as naked and unashamed. In other words, they had nothing hidden. And for Jesus, the equivalent is that it says that he never told a lie. And so we start to see that nakedness or nothing hidden it doesn't mean that we tell everybody everything about everything in our lives. There's just not enough time. But what it is saying is that because we haven't sinned, we don't have anything to hide. And so we don't try to cover things up. We don't try to sew fig leaves together, if you will, like Adam and Eve did when they ate the forbidden fruit. We're an open book, would be another way of saying it. And so the question that I want you to think about and bat around with your group has to do with this concept. Go ahead and read those scriptures of what it means to have nothing to hide, or as Jesus had said, never told a lie. And I want you to consider that then. What does it mean to lie, to tell a lie? And is it ever okay to tell a lie? And how did Jesus live a life that he never told a lie? And really, how can we do the same? Again, we're trying to understand this picture and apply it to our lives. So read those scriptures, think about that, talk about that idea, and when you're ready to dive into the next set of scriptures, you can press play to continue. Adam and Eve were both naked and they had no shame. There was nothing hidden, and that's because they hadn't sinned. There was nothing for them to hide. Jesus was the same way as this picture because he never deceived anyone, never lied, and he never sinned. He never fell prey to temptation. What we're going to see in the next two sections here is that affects relationships with God and with people. We're going to start out by looking at the relationship with God. Adam and Eve, before they ate the forbidden fruit, were naked and unashamed before God. Jesus was always open before the Father, before God. But what we see is that what happens when Adam and Eve sin, then they try to hide from God. That's what the scriptures that I have there for you. But what we see in the opposite side is that Jesus would often take times to go off and be alone with God. He wanted to be together with God. He wasn't afraid of God. And so we've got those two different pictures. We have Adam and Eve, well, ideally before the fall, but we have that picture of them after the fall trying to hide, and the picture of Jesus throughout his life not trying to hide, but running to the Father. In the middle of that, I've got some scriptures there that talk about really the foolishness of trying to hide from God. The psalmist explains it the best, and so I'll let you read that psalm that is talking about the fact that God is everywhere, and no matter where we go, God is there. There's no way for us to hide from God. And so as you think about being a person with nothing hidden and nothing to hide before God, what I'd like for you to do is to talk about that idea of God knowing everything about you, seeing everything about you. And do you consider that to be a good thing or a bad thing? Do you find it comforting like Jesus, where you want to draw near to God? Or do you find it frightening like Adam and Eve because you know that what you did was not good? And so you try to hide from God. Read those scriptures, talk about those questions, and when you're ready to dive into the last section, you can press play to continue. Well, we're into the last section now, and I know there's a lot here, but really, the picture is quite simple. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and all of your strength, with nothing hidden and nothing to hide. When we do that, we listen to God's perspective, we live the kind of life that God has designed for us, and we like being around God. We want to walk with God. The same thing then is true in our relationship with people who are made in the image of God. You see, when we follow God's commands, what we do is we live justly. We are fair with people. We even love mercy, so that if people were not fair with us, we don't want revenge. We end up loving them, loving our neighbor as ourselves, and we cut them a break. We have mercy as we're working with people, so that they will walk with God as well. This idea of living a life with nothing hidden and nothing to hide not only applies to our relationship with God, but our relationship with people as well. They're intertwined in such a way that you cannot separate the two, as you're going to see with the scriptures here. Jesus said that the second command is equally important. You shall love your neighbor as yourself, as we saw last week. But there are some other scriptures here that show that this love with God ends up transferring into obeying God's commands. And when we obey God's commands, we treat people with love and respect, because that is a large portion of what God commands. So this whole idea of being transparent and unashamed, naked and unashamed, nothing hidden and nothing to hide, is something that applies to God, who already sees everything, but it also applies to people who don't already see everything. We should be people who are not trying to hide from each other, turning on each other. As we see with Adam and Eve, the first thing that happens is they blame each other for their own sin. They turn against each other. But that was never God's design or desire for our lives. God wants us to have a relationship with each other where we are open with one another and where we do not sin against one another or sin against God. That perfect picture is not something that we have to strive for or achieve. But I want to reiterate what we said all the way back in the beginning of this video, is that it is something that we receive. We love because God first loved us. We know what love looks like because God gives it to us openly, willingly, unconditionally. Even when we don't listen to God or follow God, God still pours out love on us with hopes that we will see it and respond to it. You see, the perfect life is a response to the love of God. It is receiving the gift of the love of God, and it's letting it overflow from God to us and then to all the people around us. It's not something we have to work at or strive for. It's something we receive. What I'd like for you to do is to consider this last section of nothing hidden and nothing to hide with people, and then talk about how we can live those kinds of lives together with people around us. And then pray for one another, that we will take the time to draw near to God, to receive love from God, and to be people who let that overflow into our relationships with others, so that we will live the perfect life that God has designed us for and desires for us every day. Know that I'm praying for you, and I ask you to pray for me as well, that will be a reflection of who I am more and more each day as well, that all of us will walk together with God. God bless.